Okay, good morning, everybody. It is the 24th of April, Friday, and of course it is 2020. This is the first day of week 5 of the South African national lockdown. That means we've finished 4 weeks, completely finished 4 weeks. So 28 days, that's quite an accomplishment. Who would have thought just a few months ago that this would have been how we spent our April? But here we are, of course, and coping. Of course, whilst the worst of the epidemic is almost certainly yet to come, the President's address last night indicated that there's some relaxations of the lockdown that are coming. So despite this, we're still very likely to be in some form of lockdown for many weeks and months to come. This situation can serve as a catalyst for interpersonal conflict and interpersonal tensions to arise. We obviously call these interpersonal tensions, we call the outcome of them conflict. And conflict just means a clash of two opposing forces coming together. In relationships, this means a difference in beliefs or a difference in perspective or approach. And this can lead to a disagreement or disharmony or some form of disalignment in the relationship. So generally, people are holding two ideas about conflict at the same time in their mind. So there's two perspectives that people have about conflicts that typically go together. The first one is that they recognize that it is inevitable. They recognize as long as there are relationships, there will be conflict. Because people are people, they're individuals, and no two people are the same. And so eventually, it doesn't matter how good the relationship is, conflict is going to happen. So people recognize this. But they also have a second belief, which is conflict is bad and should be avoided. And if you think about these two beliefs, there's no reason that they should exist together. In fact, there's conflict between these two beliefs, because if we acknowledge that conflict is an inevitable part of being in a relationship, then it makes more sense to say, well, how do I become good at conflict? How do we manage conflict in a healthy way, as opposed to how do we just put all of our efforts and energy into trying to avoid it? So resolving this conflict between these two beliefs about conflict is important as well. The reasons we tend to avoid conflict is that we are typically habituated to dislike conflict. And we learn this often through our early experiences in life. We learn very early on that conflict is messy, it's painful, it's uncertain, it feels risky and dangerous. And the reason for this, to be frank, is that most people are actually not very good at conflict. And unfortunately, that includes often the people that raise us. And these are our earliest experiences of conflict. So you can think about the way, for example, your parents handled conflict, and you can see how this has influenced the way you think about conflict, positively or negatively, but also the way that you personally engage with conflict and your conflict management style. So we can think about internal conflict or external conflict. External conflict, of course, is between people, between groups. Internal conflict is in our minds, so it's within ourselves, and it often comes down to conflict between two opposing ideas. I believe that I want to live a long life so I can be around for my kids. I want to be healthy, but at the same time, I don't do any exercise. So this is internal conflict. Perhaps I'm a smoker, for example, but at the same time, I care about my health. These two ideas clashed within each other. I want to be a good person. I want people to like me, but I also don't want to be a doormat. This can cause internal conflict. And being aware of this conflict and having the mechanisms to resolve it is really important. Otherwise, we walk around life with a significant amount of cognitive dissonance, which is having these different parts of our brains believing different things. And that results, of course, in problematic behavior. So moving a bit more now to external conflict, more often than not, people are engaging in what we call destructive conflict, as opposed to constructive conflict. So in destructive conflict, the goal is about winning. It's about dominating at all costs. Doesn't matter what the price that we pay for that is. And because it's all about winning or dominating or not losing, that means the rules of engagement are very loose. We get away with a lot. We give ourselves permission to do a lot. And this is often the case when we feel hurt. This is something that comes up in anger management a lot. It's a rule we have for ourselves. If someone hurts me, well then all bets are off. I get to respond in any way because I've been hurt. This is a kind of belief system that we have, and of course that does immense damage to our relationships and to the people in our lives. So destructive conflict is about attacking, it's about defending, it's about blame and accusations. It's a fight, regardless of the damage that's done in the way. If this has been our experience of conflict, well, then it makes complete sense that we would want to avoid it at all conflicts, because very little good can come out of that. Relationships burn and fall away because of it, of course. We suffer an immense amount of pain because of it. But if we choose then to avoid conflict, well, we pay a price for this avoidance, of course. So ultimately, it undermines our voice in our relationships. And if we don't have a voice in a relationship, that means our emotional and all of our needs are just not understood, which means if they get met, it's rarely through luck. We're just kind of leaving it out there and hoping that our needs will be met. This means that problems tend to simmer, they lurk below the surface, and then we express our unhappiness through passive-aggressive and indirect ways, and this can undermine trust, it can undermine respect in our relationships. And because of that, resentment builds. We become angrier and angrier, but don't know what to do with that anger. And that's not sustainable, of course, because eventually something's going to happen, and then all of that anger comes out, and that becomes very difficult to manage, firstly, for ourselves. It's so powerful, it's very hard to be careful and deliberate in the way we communicate that. But also, it's very hard to be on the receiving end of that, because it's a lot, and often it's a lot that wasn't necessarily recognized as being issues. This is something that happened in December last year, and I was so upset about it. It's very difficult to be on the receiving end of that and to try to find a way of working through it. So we often think about conflict as dangerous because it involves things like rejection, it involves possible abandonment and judgment. What are people going to think of me? Are they going to think I'm a bad person if I start speaking up? And these are very difficult experiences because ultimately we are social mammals. Some research has indicated that rejection can be felt in very similar ways to physical pain. That's how powerful it can be. And this, of course, has a very good evolutionary basis, because being social animals, a lot of the time being kicked out of the pack was literally life-threatening. And so there had to be some type of mechanism that kept us in the pack, kept us with that belonging, that acceptance. And you can see how that's translated now into our relationships. So this is normal. And it is possible to build our tolerance towards these feelings and to lean into rejection and to let go a little bit of the consequences of what might happen if we speak out. But they tend to be exacerbated by feelings of self-doubt and inadequacy, and generally low feelings of self-worth. If that's my starting point, then it becomes even harder for me to engage in conflict, which is already a difficult thing to do, especially at the beginning when we're practicing these skills. So, like many of these dynamics, it can be a feedback loop. It can be either a positive feedback loop or it can be a negative feedback loop. For example, if I feel insecure in my worth, I tend to avoid conflict. This means that there's a whole lot of ripple effects and down the line effects, such as I get taken advantage of. People don't treat me the way I want to be treated, and this makes me feel worse about myself, further exacerbating my low self-worth, and then that means I avoid conflict even more. Likewise, it can be positive in terms of if I'm feeling pretty secure in myself, I have high levels of self-acceptance or self-compassion. This means I'm more able to face my fear and navigate conflict in a healthier way. And that then feeds back and makes me feel more satisfied and better about myself, because my needs are now being met in relationships. I'm being seen, I'm being heard. So these are powerful dynamics that can go either way, and we can harness the positive feedback loop as well, of course. And of course, conflict is not about saying, okay, well, now conflict is important. We need to constantly be engaging in conflict in our relationships. Either too much or too little conflict in a relationship, both of these are red flags. And we need to pick our battles accordingly, of course. We need to know what to let go and what's not worth it. And we need to know when we need to speak up for ourselves in order to be true to ourselves. And the best way to do this is practice. Knowing your conflict management style helps. So this means understanding, well, what is it how do I typically respond to conflict in different situations? Because that allows you to address the weaknesses and the shortcomings there, and also to leverage the strengths and the parts of conflict that you are good at. You might be a very good listener, for example, but just not so good at actually communicating what it is you need. Important listening is a very well, I should say active listening is a very important skill. So already you're on the way there. So we can think of conflict styles as a trade-off between different needs. It's the needs of ourselves versus the needs of the relationship or the other person, perhaps. If we focus exclusively on keeping the peace all the time, making everyone else happy, making sure that we're liked, the relationship is probably going to be very good. But that comes at the expense of our needs. And as we touched on just now, well, that leads to all sorts of resentment and other structural issues in the relationship. But likewise, if we focus exclusively on our own needs and we dominate and we control as a way of achieving those needs, well, then the relationship suffers. And ultimately, if we're not in good relationships that are healthy and balanced, that's going to undermine our happiness anyway. So finding that balance is important, and being able to prioritize our needs and communicate those assertively, but also being able to be conscious of the needs of the other person and identifying those. The process of identifying what it is that the other party needs is very important. And you don't have to be clairvoyant. You don't have to mind read. In fact, that can lead to bigger problems with those assumptions. You can ask directly. You can say, well, this is what I'm hearing, or what is it that you actually need here? Asking the right questions is a very important part of conflict management in getting to the underlying issues, because there's so much noise with the surface behavior. A lot of the time we just see behavior. It's noisy, it's unclear. There's often very good reasons for that behavior below. And once we start to understand that, we can actually start to engage and wrestle with the real issue. And this, of course, is a key part of emotional intelligence. Because if we can start having a conversation about the actual cause of the conflict, then we have more chance of resolving it. This might be something like leaving the lid of the toothpaste, for example. This might lead into a significant fight, and I'm sure anyone who's been in any type of relationship can attest to this, how often the small things become massive things, and you wonder, well, this feels really disproportionate. How did we get here? If you understand perhaps that the one party felt that they were shouldering excessive responsibility, they're doing a lot, they're feeling burnt out, they're feeling that the relationship is not necessarily fair in all these aspects, they're feeling unacknowledged or unappreciated, then you can start to understand why it became a big thing. And then that party can understand that the offending party, the one who left the lid off, perhaps was feeling constantly picked on and not good enough and always inadequate, and nothing they did was up to speed. Once you start to get below the actual behavior, you can start to understand and engage with the problem, and you can manage it effectively. So healthy conflict is constructive. It's a collaboration towards a common goal. You're building towards something as opposed to breaking everything down. It celebrates common ground. It finds common ground and it celebrates it. This is what we have in common, as opposed to these are all the things that are different. It comes from a place of goodwill, which is exactly that, acting in good faith, saying, well, we both are trying to work towards this goal, as opposed to having these hidden motives and manipulation under the surface. Language is chosen very carefully. The words we use matter, and we understand that we use certain words or phrases that is going to trigger certain reactions in the person that we are engaging with. And so we're mindful of it and conscious of that. It requires practice. That's the only way we become good at it. Like anything, we can talk about it and we can understand the theory, but you actually have to go and you have to practice conflict. And it helps to practice in the easier relationships. Relationships where the stakes are a little bit lower, and to develop our skills there and to see what works and what doesn't work, and to start to feel the positive feedback effect of engaging in conflict and how good that can actually feel if it's done right, as much as it is uncertain and scary in the moment. So these are just the basics of conflict management. It's just a very quick overview, of course. Again, it's about practice, but you will see that it takes a perspective shift to think about conflict as beneficial for a relationship as opposed to dangerous for it. And you have to feel secure in that relationship to engage in conflict, of course. But then it feeds back and it contributes to more security in the relationship. It improves understanding. That's a really important part, because if there's no conflict, I don't really understand what it is that you want or need. Once we start to get into these conflict situations and manage them as constructively as we can, the understanding comes through, and respect comes through it as well, mutual respect. So the thing with these skills, and it applies to most soft skills, but especially conflict management, is you will use them in every single relationship. It doesn't matter whether it's with a colleague or whether it's a romantic relationship, family, friends. These are the same skills that you use, and to be good at them gives you a significant edge, especially in the workplace, because, again, a lot of people aren't very good at it. And to be able to be in control of your feelings and not have to run away from conflict that in a way is effectively a superpower. So my name is James Sturdy. I'm with the Regent Business School Counseling Services. This was our conflict management session in the lockdown video series. We are taking a break on Monday because it's a public holiday, and we will be back with the sessions or these videos on Wednesday. And we'll move then into starting to talk a little bit about relaxation techniques, and then on Friday we'll start speaking about adjusting and transitioning back into the beginnings of what might be the semblance of normal life and the challenges that might be there. So have a very good long weekend, and we'll catch you next week.